I was pretty conscious that I didn't know who I was really or commit myself. And actually, in some ways, that was made it hard to be fully involved in relationships. I mean, of course, I had relationships and we would go through all the motions, but I didn't know who I was. And if you don't know who you are, you're not ready to give yourself to other persons or even fully participate because you're not yet who you are. And it was some point in my late 20s that it clicked. I want to make things that help people help make themselves. And that's where I came up with the mission statement for my company. I knew what I wanted to do. And that made it easier to decide, should I stay put for 6 months or should I keep trying different things? Because I knew what I was supposed to do. And so even when you know who you are and what particularity you are of all the people in the world, and you're only going to be around for a certain amount of time, it makes it easier to accept a little bit of constraints on freedom because you're doing what you're supposed to do. If you don't know, then you're just going to accept like the first constraint that comes along, like, oh, I guess I should stay in this job because other people do. But you're willing to accept it. So that's where I was then. And whenever I've gone astray in the years since then, I come back to this idea of a playful, creative person engaged with other people, active in the world.
Just to go back to the conversation, Joseph, I'm very, very curious to maybe explain again what happened in India and why. I think all the other listeners are curious about this meeting that just happened, this experience.
Well, and that goes. So the person who introduced you was in India with me, and both of us had a few days on our hand because of, you could say, misfortune. I'm an artist, and Cecilia's a curator, and just because there was no room and poor planning on the gallery part, there's nothing for us to do. At the opening, I met a filmmaker who said, I make films and I also do art. And I said, oh, what kind of art do you do? And she says, I do portraits, but not specifically to hang on a wall. They're portraits to see into you or into particular people, especially creative people, to see what is holding you back and what you need to fully grow into yourself. And I said, oh, I love the idea of art that does something in the world because we do a lot of art in children's hospitals with veterans. We do projects that try to move people in a way that they're trying to move, and deal with certain things.
Hmm.
Um, and so I said, well, that sounds fascinating. She says, I'm starting a practice where I will do portraits. I'm about to start that. And I said, oh, well, I'd be interested. And she goes, I will do your portrait. Come tomorrow. And so I grabbed Cecilia. The next day we go there and she asks a few questions about date of birth, just date and time of birth. But then just after a really close look in our face and drawing for about 10 minutes, she just reels off all of this stuff. And you've probably all seen astrological things like, you are an intensely personal person, but you like to form strong bonds with other people. And people are like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it's not falsifiable. It's just complementary and anyone could agree with it. But the things she said separately about myself and then she worked on Cecilia were falsifiable. Like, you have two younger sisters. You're very close to both parents. You're very concerned right now. You have a son, don't you? You have only one. Like, and I don't have a lot of stuff on social media, so it would be hard to figure that together. We only met like, I don't know, 8 hours previously, but she just nails all this thing. And then she says, and one of your problems is you're always trying to please other people, but your best work, both personally and professionally, is done when you're genuinely selfish. And she's just nailing all of these things.
Wow.
And, she says, no, I bet your favorite food groups are X. And that built up a whole lot of sense of, oh, this woman really has something to show me and tell me. And then the same thing happens for Cecilia, who completely different family story, completely different issues she's working on, but Anjali just nailed all of that. And then we spent the next day or two with her. And I said, I really want to work on some of the things you told me about. And she said, well, I would recommend some meditation. And I said, okay, let's just start with something simple. So she gave me a really simple meditation. And it's just to breathe in for 4 counts, filling yourself with light, hold that for 4 counts,
Mhm.
And in that 4 counts, examine what is holding you back, any darkness in you, and then let that go over 6 counts. Then rest for 2 counts, and then do the process again. Very simple. And
Mhm.
so I did that. And in the first day, well, the first few days of doing that, I was like, oh, okay. There was that regret of something that happened 10 years ago. It was like cleaning out a closet, like all the bad stuff just, but that didn't solve all of like all the easy stuff. And then I started to encounter, as we probably all do, parts of myself that, if you have to imagine it, it's like a dark thread wound around a silver
Mm.
thread. We all have things, I think, that are, you don't want to totally get rid of them. Let's say, like, maybe you form really strong attachments to people. But if it's too strong and you're like clingy, that's bad. But if you totally got rid of that and you were just like, whatever, I don't form very strong attachments, that's not good either. So what's the right balance? Or let's say, in my case, maybe I try to please people. If you totally get rid of that, then there goes your generosity. There goes, you might walk up to a stranger and say, hey, can I help you with something? Or someone reaches out to you and you respond positively. There's always a point where something that's genuine and good,
Yeah.
if you hold on to it too tightly, can become bad. And so, after a few days of doing this meditation, I use that period of the 4 beats after you filled yourself with light to look inside. Okay, and like, really, let's tease out what's the good part, what's the bad part, and let that go.
Incredible. It's I guess an ongoing process.
Yeah.
Meditation for me was the same. So
Mm.
after like a couple of years, I could start noticing these things. So I could become aware of some patterns I have of something that happened in the past. So it's very, very powerful. And I think, as you said, you don't want to get rid of those things because those things define you. But what you want is to be aware of those things. So only by being aware, I think you can truly be free.
Yeah.
So as you said, if you're pleasing people, you don't want to get rid of your generosity, but you want to be able to recognize, okay, am I pleasing him because he deserves that, because it gives me something, or it's just a pattern that I have? And once you can navigate that, then I think your life gets better, and you're not like enslaved from this pattern, but you're using it.
To
So
be
I
more
think it's
free to get, I know freedom is one of the big things that runs through your stories and your interviews.
yeah.
To be free in the right way. Um, and that's actually a topic we talk about a lot, is too much freedom, or just freedom of something that doesn't have an identity. That's like a plastic bag blowing down the highway. That's free, you know, but it doesn't mean anything. To be a being that is both worth being contained, but to be free, that I'm still thinking about this and working on an art piece about it,
Hmm.
is what is the right line between freedom and when you maybe voluntarily constrain your freedom a little bit to be able to build something.
Mm,
And maybe
mhm.
this is applicable to you where you are. One of the things Chili and I talk about all the time is she has a lot of freedom, but ultimately she wants to build institutions and maybe a family or whatever. And I say, you don't just have a kid and then a year or so later say, that wasn't for me. I'm just going to walk away from that. At some point, to build the things that built you, you have to give up a little bit of freedom. So how do you make those choices? And me, I have a company that keeps people employed, and I hope will last beyond myself. And you talk to a lot of founders and are a founder yourself. You want to build something, but at some point there'll be a day when you wake up and you're like, I feel like I want to go to Thailand today. Or, I'm going to spend some time and hike the length of the Amazon River or whatever. But you have to stay put to keep that commitment you made. So at some point you do have to accept little constraints on freedom. And I think that's one of the interesting topics.
Mm, mhm. How was this process for you? Like, when did you start realizing it? Because I think at the beginning you're so much involved in the project that you don't have these questions. You don't ask these questions to yourself. Oh, I wish to go to this place. You're just focusing
Yeah.
on the project. But then somehow it comes up. So I'm curious, how was navigating, how you are actually navigating these nowadays?
Well, let me start when I was closer to your age. So I spent the early part of my 20s just trying a whole lot of different things. And I was pretty conscious that I didn't know who I was really or commit myself.
Mm,
And actually, in some ways, that was made it hard to be fully involved in relationships. I mean, of course, I had relationships and we would go through all the motions, but I didn't know who I was. And if you don't know who you are, you're not ready to give yourself to other persons or even fully participate because you're not yet who you are. And it was some point in my late 20s that I was like, oh, like it clicked. I want to make things that help people help make themselves. And that's where I came up with the mission statement for my company. I knew what I wanted to do. And that made it easier to decide, oh, should I stay put for 6 months or should I keep trying different things? Because I knew what I was supposed to do. And so even when you know who you are and what particularity you are of all the people in the world, and you're only going to be around for a certain amount of time, it makes it easier to accept a little bit of constraints on freedom because you're doing what you're supposed to do. If you don't know, then you're just going to accept like the first constraint that comes along, like, oh, I guess I should stay in this job because other people do. But you're willing to
mm-hmm.
accept it. So that's where I was then. And whenever I've gone astray in the years since then, I come back to this idea of a playful, creative person engaged with other people, active in the world. And whenever our business loses its way, I always think, this
You go
particular
back to
market
that.
is just
Yeah.
not working out. Yeah. Where are people who need the stuff that we can make? And that's what made us early pioneers in, say, doing really cool interactive art in children's hospitals, because there's like a captive audience there. Now we're really trying to do some stuff with people in refugee camps, because there's hundreds of thousands of people who spend their entire lives in these limbo states, and we need to create things for them.
It's very
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, first of all, the fact that you're building
Yeah.
something that is an extension of you, of that playful, curious, creative person. And second, that what you're building is actually super helpful for these people that most of the time are not taking too much care somehow,
Yeah. It also helps
especially on
figure.
the artistic side, I would say. So you work like you're dealing with these people always on a like systemic level. These people need A, B, C, or D, but I guess in the list, maybe few people say they need okay creativity,
Yeah.
uh, inspiration, and you actually try to give them through your art. So I think that's very it's very noble.
Yeah, sometimes we make things, but then we also design spaces. And I like to say we're sort of creating the conditions for community, because that's the unspoken need we all have, is for to have the right relationships to others in the spaces we spend most of our time. And I guess that's community. And so it was interesting. I was asking Anjali about meditation a few weeks ago. I'm like, okay, with this filling myself with light. And she says, well, one way to think about it is think about when you are at your best and you really feel confident that you're doing what you're supposed to do. Try to recreate that feeling. And when you're filled with that feeling, all of your choices will become much easier. And I think you said something like that too. It's like when you're your full, genuine self, a lot of these agonizing choices become easy because you already know. Arcade Fire has that song, you already know.
How does it work, your process? I don't know if you can give me a clear answer about this, but I'm curious to know, as a creative person that you are, how do you get the ideas? How does ideas come up to you?
Well, that's a great question, I think. I only thought about that in the last few years, and one of the things that triggered that thought was a kid's question.
Hmm.
And then also some meditation recently. So, broadly speaking, I would characterize the creative process as like breathing. You take things in from the world, you process it, you think about it, you set things on the shelf, you rearrange the parts, you let them sit or whatever, and then you breathe out. And breathing out is the process of giving back to the world. And what we really like about any creator in any field is the unique way that they see and transform things and then give it back to us. And that's why I think, the most important part of art is often seeing. It's like, what does an artist see? Or let's say a dancer, how do they interpret movement? Or a poet, like words that might just fall on our ear. Like, you half hear conversations. Well, a poet will take those and just rearrange them, and we'll have picked out a really clever phrase that someone just said in passing. So it's the
Yeah.
seeing that's really important.
I like this image of like inspiration. So finding a way to see, perceive things, and then breathing them out and giving them to the world. Like if I listen to my favorite creators, like Paulo Coelho, for example, he also says this. But I'm curious because I think like artists are people who are very sensible, so they can easily, I would say, then correct me if I'm wrong, they can easily put themselves in a place where they can feel this inspiration, they can
Yes.
perceive the ideas around them. But like I would say, I think it's something that everyone can do, but most people say, I don't know how to do it. Like, what could be the advice? Like, also for myself, if I want to get
Yeah.
into that place where I can connect and with this inspiration and find and see the ideas around me, how can I do that?
Well, some watching and listening is passive, and it takes an effort to really watch and to really, like, say you're with some kids and they're playing or they're drawing or you're watching nature, to for a minute stop putting what you're seeing into the categories you already know and just
Mm,
truly see it and just truly immerse yourself in the experience. And that's like completely letting go of your ego and just really letting it come in. and and I think that's a good half of it, is totally dissolving your ego and letting it come in. And if you're finding you have writer's
mm,
block or some kind of a block, it may mean, just like with breathing, you've been breathing out too much and you haven't let it in. But there's another
mm,
half of that which I think is equally important, and it's like the process of active watching and active listening. And to me, it's similar to reading. So when I was in university, we were reading a lot of important historical or philosophical or religious texts. And sometimes the teacher would say, I don't want you to read 40 pages tonight. I want you to read these 2 pages. And with every sentence, ask, well, could it be different? Like, because there's a tendency, let's say, in reading or any other narrative form to say, oh, yeah, that follows from the next, that follows from the next, that follows from the next. Or even watching, I'm watching cars go down the road. Oh, they always stop at the red light. Maybe that's not a great example. Or kids playing, oh, we're going to put the sand in the bucket and then pour the bucket into something else. There's
mhm,
like a sequence, and we lull ourselves into thinking that. So, one of the exercises I do, like, let's say I have to wait in a queue, or I'm stuck in traffic, or the bus doesn't come, or whatever, instead of pulling out my phone and sort of letting other people's narratives fill me, I just look around and I start imagining, well, I wonder if things could be different. Like, what's the
mm.
story of how that train stop was built? What are other ways it could be? And I just sort of actively interrogate the world through my eyes and just sort of play and rearrange things. So so that's sort of 3 parts. So the first part is being totally empathetic and letting observations fill you, because that's the only way you're going to get something new that you've never seen, is if you open yourself up.
Without the ego,
Yeah.
because what can happen and could be a trap is, okay, now I want to get an insightful idea, and it doesn't work because you're putting your ego.
The second aspect of that is there's a little ego involved, but not consciously. You're looking and always asking, well, how could things be different? Oh, that's an interesting thing. Could that be rearranged? Or you travel and you see how they do things in other places and it's perfectly functional there, and you're like, what if I mix things around? So it's just sort of a playful way of being in the world, but you're not trying to create anything. You're just actively interrogating and asking questions. And then I think the third thing is being open to things that don't fit. Like, oh, you think you've got everything figured out, but then you meet somebody or you see somebody who challenges you in a way you don't understand, or you see a really interesting, cool thing. Like I was paragliding in Colombia, and you land in these fields, and you have to wait for a little while, pack up your gear and whatnot. And I'm just watching these. I was working on a playground commission in the U.S., and I'm just watching the kids, and they're just playing with farm implements. Like there's a piece of pipe, and there's like a drum that I guess is to hold water for cattle, and they're tilting things on weird angles, and they're running on the top, and that idea
Okay.
of just playing with anything. And I thought, okay, how can I bring that attitude of playing with unusual forms to a place where they can afford to make these forms, and I more have to make it palatable to the parents because the kids will play with anything. But just noticing things, and if you don't have an immediate use, developing in your mind like this storehouse of stuff that may not fit. It doesn't necessarily fit with your career trajectory or the project you're
Sure.
working on, but it's interesting. And then you develop this rich library of things you can throw at problems when the time comes.
What are the
And then
best
beyond that,
ideas you got
yeah,
out of this three-step process? If you can tell me like one or two
yeah.
that suddenly came
Well,
out.
so my extended family is really into birding, and I get so bored with. Well, I sort of get bored with birds, and my wife is a marine biologist, so I spent a lot of time with birds and shells. And shells are really interesting mathematically. Let's do the shell example and then the bird example, because like these things are filling my mind, and instead of me saying, "Oh no, I don't want to pay attention to that. I'm an artist. I don't have time." I'm looking at the shells and I'm studying because we spent a lot of time on the beach, and I'm looking at the surface and I'm like, what's kind of interesting is it's super smooth on the inside where the animal lives in a shell, and the outside
Mm,
has all these amazing little patterns of dots that are mathematically swirling around, and there's large and small, and it's just an amazing pattern of texture and multiple layers of information, if you will. And then the mathematics of how, say, a turret shell forms. It's an ellipse that orbits around a central spine. And so we had this commission, which turned into this. I think it's the world's largest acrylic sculpture in Canada. And we had to put fasteners on it. And the client was saying, "Oh, could we make the fasteners invisible?" And I'm like, "Well, one, that's going to be really hard to do." And then instead of hiding them, why don't we make a pattern that's interesting, that's like a secondary layer of information? And to prove that that's aesthetically possible, I keep this bowl of shells by my desk that I had just been collecting. I didn't know what they were going to be used for. And I just pick up the shells and I say, look at all these tiny. It's almost a better art object because it first of all has the macro form, this beautiful spiraling form, and it has the color. But then when you drop down a level of analysis and look closer, it has this really amazing multi-layered tiny patterns of dots. Let's just make the fasteners really interesting because it's going to be hard to hide them, and it's a more interesting object if the structure, the bone structure. We also made the internal skeleton visible because it's a translucent shell. So all that time with seashells and at the beach helped me solve a design problem because it gave me the courage to think that, oh, the thing that this little animal needs to live, like I guess to dig in the sand and stay in the sand, that's why it has that texture, and to resist other animals, like sometimes they're spines, sometimes they're just little bumps, is a beautiful thing in itself. So I didn't know what the shells were when I was looking at them, but they're just filling my mind. And then, oh my goodness, all the birds. So many people around me. Oh, look, there's a roseate spoonbill. Oh, look at that. These white pelicans are rare in this area. Look at how it flies. And it just sort of, to me, it was just like, oh my goodness. There's little black birds, there's cool, colorful birds, and there's big wading birds. That was my three categories of birds for the longest time. But I would watch them fly. And when you're around people who are interested in it, you have no choice. You have to say, well, let me see what's interesting in this. And I would watch these birds fly. And when you look at them head on, you see how the flight is almost like a sine wave that starts with the body of the bird and ripples out to the tips of the wings. And then when you see them perpendicular, the tip of the wing is also describing this wave pattern in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And so, at first when I would look at the birds, I was saying, oh, okay, there's a band behind the neck and the feet are this color. And that was not terribly interesting. I started looking for those patterns, and those just sort of sat in my head for a long time until we had this commission in Houston, which was simultaneously about bird migration, because the city of Houston is along the Central American flyway where birds migrate north and south every year. And they cross the Gulf of Mexico, and they're tired because they can't land and sleep in the water. So they spend a whole lot of time around Houston for a few days regaining their strength. And the other thing is that many human migrants from South and Central America, Houston is very welcoming to immigrants, and that's where they get their foothold in the U.S. economy. That's where they get their jobs, where they have kids, where they learn multiple languages, and then they move separately. So to me, I saw this parallel that Houston was a place for, and I named the sculpture Wings Over Water, and it's a giant sculpture that has a crank and it's driving, because when you have circular motion and you're driving linear motion, you get sine patterns. And so it was like a abstraction of the flight that birds do when they fly over long distances over water. So it was all that watching that
It's
sort
incredible.
of like,
Yeah, it came back.
and
But the
and
interesting
then
thing is that you
yeah,
didn't know if and when and how it would have came back, but it did somehow.
you just, and that's part of, I think, seeing like an artist is you just say, what's interesting about this view, and what can I take from it? I have no idea how it's going to be useful. I'm not thinking, oh, how's it going to make me money? How's it going to make me stand out from other artists? I'm just looking at it and storing it away. And when my son was young, and I had a whole lot of nieces and nephews and cousins, I would often be taking care of kids. And instead of resenting, oh, I should be in my studio working or whatever, I'd be playing with kids for a few hours every day. And so kids are an amazing thing to look at for ideas because they're seeing the
It's
world fresh
incredible. Yeah.
every day. And so I would remind myself that, many great artists, you don't have to fit the stereotype of the voice of truth, telling truth to power, and the anguished soul living in a garret with a beret. That's a very 19th century, that you can make art out of anything. And I would just watch the kids and I'd see how they would interact with objects, and that would give me ideas.
Yeah, no, I believe it. It's an infinitive number of ideas. I really like this way of seeing the world as an artist and living the world as an artist. I think it's one of the most free way to live. So as you said, you don't do that because of the money, because of a game, because of views, but like real artists do it because that's what they are, and it's just a way to be and express themselves.
And I see art as a very broad category. Like being an entrepreneur is the same thing. A lot of people I know who are successful entrepreneurs, it was a particular moment. So a guy I know, and he would tell you himself, well, I'm not a genius, I'm not a business genius, but he was in a family printing business, and they printed the tags that go on pillows that say, in the States, you're required to have a tag that lists the materials and says it's non-flammable, etc. Very boring. So he would
Hmm.
print the tags, and then one day an importer said, I just realized there's different regulations in every state. Could you research that and print us the tags for the other states? And instead of him saying, oh, no, that's your job, we just print, he says, oh, I could look into that. And now he's one of the two biggest companies that handles all of it's a huge business. Just because instead of saying no, he said, oh, maybe, yes. It's those little
Hmm.
things in business. And other people I know, it's some tiny little thing.
How did it happen for creative machines? So I think like your journey into creating creative machines was like artistic, but then you also brought together the entrepreneurial, the business side. How did it happen? All right.
So to me, I don't really. The definition of art changes all the time. Like, let's take Keith Haring. Oh, graffiti art isn't art. Graffiti art isn't art. Oh, I could do a show and make money. Graffiti art is fine art. it all changes, a lot of these categories. And for the first 15 years of Creative Machines, we mostly did interactive museum exhibits for museums in Europe and the States. And so when I founded the company in 1995, I didn't know exactly what I wanted. Well, I knew what I wanted to do, but I wasn't driven by a market, but more a mission. And so our mission is we create objects and environments that encourage creativity, support social interaction, and inspire self-confidence. Because those were the three things I thought were missing in the world at the time: creativity, social interaction, community, and then self-confidence in the best way, not arrogance, but the ability for each person to kind of stand on their own. And for the first 10 or 15 years, we did museum exhibits, and because that was a growing market, and I did a few little art pieces on the side. And then I started noticing that there was a certain group of people that went to museums, and typically the parents had money and time, and they could bring their kids to the children's museums or the science museums. And then I was thinking, okay, but when those kids go home, they've also got a rich environment there. Where is there suffering or need? And that drove us to start doing work for children's hospitals. And it was almost like there's a guardian angel that protects Creative Machines, because I started getting really interested in children's hospitals in about 2007, 2008. So we were one of the few studios that in the States that was doing things both in lobbies and in the treatment rooms of children's hospitals. And then when the financial crisis hit the design industry particularly hard in 2008, 2009, one area of the economy that kept growing was children's hospitals. And we had been going there from a purely mission-driven, altruistic intent, and it was probably what saved the company, because then we had a few years of work in children's hospitals before the whole economy kind of started back up again. So that was helpful from a business. It's very helpful to be driven by a mission rather than a market, because markets change. The museum industry in the States was hard hit, and it hasn't fully recovered from federal cuts that happened in 2009, and now there's even more. Then I got interested in the public art for the freedom that it gave, and because you could do things in spaces that people were already in. Like, I'd much rather, let's take Burning Man, which is fairly close to us here in the Southwest United States. People are always saying, oh, why don't you do something for Burning Man? And we have helped a lot of artists do their Burning Man installations. And I keep saying that it's fine, but you're making something for an audience for 2 weeks, and it's not a big audience in terms of the range of human expression. It doesn't really include kids. It doesn't include seniors. It doesn't include disabled people. It's relatively affluent people from California who are already high, and they're there for 2 weeks, and they're already having sort of a peak experience. I would much rather put something on a street corner that somebody passes every day, might meet with their friends, might decide to have their wedding there. It's that slow input into people's lives, or to do something in a meditation garden at a hospital where people are going through a really difficult time. And when people are going through difficult times, they may not go a distance and take 2 weeks out of their life to seek out art. The art has to come to them. And that's what drove us to public art. Again, following the mission, and the guardian angel of Creative Machines, once again, struck us with her wand because that was the time that public art became generally more funded in the US, and the museums were kind of on a downward slope.
You had no idea about all of this when you started the company, so it was just paying attention and the guardian angel, as you said.
Yeah, and I would say it didn't really happen until my mid to late 20s. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I think that's fine. I think your 20s are for figuring things out. But there was always a perceived hole in the side of me. Like, I was going to conferences, I was writing papers, I was doing all sorts of things. I was working in different jobs and getting a degree and doing all of these things and rushing around. And I think you should rush around because that's how you see a lot of stuff. But I didn't know who I was. And somehow it all just sort of clicked in my late 20s. It's like, oh, I like making stuff to solve problems for people, or to make their lives better, or to, all true change happens within people's hearts. And the real basis is community. But sometimes we need the physical objects of art and environments to sort of facilitate certain types of community and to bring things out of people. It's like
Hmm.
object in the room. Or let's say you want to go meet somebody. You could sit straight across from them, but it helps to have a coffee or a movie or some other thing to bring out aspects of your personality. And that's kind of what I do. And since I don't make movies, I make objects and environments. It all crystallized in my late 20s. And
That's
I was
nice.
fortunate.
The verb that you used, crystallize. So I like it.
Yeah. Well, I think
I
that
can
describes a
refer
lot of
to,
creativity. It's like this
yeah,
sugary solution, and then you put a little piece of dust in, and the crystal forms around the little piece of dust.
yeah, yeah. I think that's the best verb to describe it. I can actually refer to what you're saying when you mention your 20s in general, because it's something that I'm experiencing right now. So, I'm
Hmm.
25 years old. Not only me, like a lot of friends I'm talking, there is always this big question, like, what should I do? Which, I mean, on one side, I always have this question on my mind. On the other side, Zen teaches that the more you ask the question, the more you will get lost. But yet, yeah, I have this question in my mind a lot because if I see what I did over the last years, I became really passionate about startups. I joined high growing startups, so you learn how to position a product into a market, how to market it, distribute it, and sell it. And I learned many, many things about these processes. But on the other side, now I'm opening up to this big topic of meditation, awareness. I'm reading a lot, and I wish to find a way to put these things together eventually, or
Mm.
eventually not. But right now, Joseph, I'm asking you a personal advice because I feel like right now I'm somehow in a limbo where I want to start something on my own because I want to start an adventure, bring this creativity that I feel I want to find a way to express it uh, through a team and make something on our own terms. On the other side, sometimes I think, oh, maybe I should go do another experience in another startup because I'm good at that and I like that. But if I do, I would then miss the chance to start doing something on my own. But yet, as I said, I don't really know what it should be. So now I'm in this limbo, which, to be honest, I don't really know how to navigate. I don't know if I was clear. Maybe I was just thinking out
No,
loud
you
and it
were
was.
very clear. No, you're very clear. I also still find myself in that limbo. Um, I think the problem is you can do anything. And well, let me give one little bit of advice that sort of worked for me recently is in terms of turning what your interests are into a business. Because I like the idea that you have to start realistically with how people are making choices with their time and money and find ways to not grab more of that, but to rearrange what they're already doing. And I'll just give you an example.
Hmm.
The sort of business idea that's been driving our not for profit, which the whole idea of it is we're making a community. The United States is mostly a car culture, and people are rushing around, multiple jobs, they're picking up their kids from childcare. Then they know they got to help them with homework and stuff, and everybody's isolated in their car or their house, and they have to get fast food, which is no longer cheap, to feed their kids. And then they're rushing home, and they might bring in a tutor to help their kid who's falling behind in class. And everybody's solving these problems by themselves, and it's expensive. So I'm like, there's no way I can take more money from these people because they have no more money to spend and they're already overtaxed with time. So I said, well, what if in one location, they had the school program, and then we have a fast casual restaurant, and then we do evening programs. So in a single place, their kids are playing, they're eating. What you have in Europe, in every European city square, we have yet to reinvent in the States.
Yeah.
And so to make it a working business, I start with okay, everybody has a limited budget. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the money that they're spending on Starbucks in the morning and they'll have their coffee here because their kids can play and do stuff and they can do some co working. And then in the afternoon, the money that they're paying for childcare, the money they're paying for bad fast food, I'm going to take that, but I'm going to give them community in return.
Yeah, I love
So,
it. Yeah. I like the
so
example. Don't change people's choices and time, but rearrange them in a better way.
right. We're at our best when we are thinking from a position of abundance rather than scarcity. But sometimes to focus that abundance, it's helpful to realize that there is scarcity in certain aspects of the world. Imagine your audience and the scarcity that they have. And imagine yourself is in a very, I may not be using Zen in the right way, but you're not actually pushing and pulling a whole lot. You're just flipping a few switches in their life. So let's say you really do want to make a business of mindfulness and meditation. I like, podcasts and apps because people are already using podcasts and apps, but that people are already in that space. So here's how I think creatively. I was in New Orleans for a conference and I was staying in a place that was a laundromat where you can wash your clothes and a bar where you could get a drink. And there was a place for kids to play. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is genius because all of these like stressed, typically single caregiver, single parent families, they want to socialize with other people, but they also have childcare and they have laundry to do. And you could do it all in one place. So it's not taking anything out of their life. It's just doing everything
Yeah,
together.
it's a
So what
win-win-win
it's
situation,
a
yeah, for
win-win-win.
everyone.
So what win-win-win do you have? So you have all of these elements, these things you want to do. You can't ask people to do something extra, but what would they be willing to give up in order to? So maybe it's TikTok videos where you do 10 seconds of meditation or some compelling way to enter into the stream of things people are already doing, things
I
people,
like it. Entering into
you know,
streams of
that
things
people
that
are
people already do.
already in.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think
That
there's
is
something to be
interesting.
said for that. But
Hmm.
I don't know if that's personal enough. That's more of a business thing. How do you find out that that's the right thing for you? And I guess
Yeah,
that's
also
where,
also because on the other side, and I think we mentioned this, like sometimes some of the people that I admire the most, um, they teach Zen and this principle in things that are not related to that. So like, the Miyagi when he's teaching Karate Kid, like through painting the walls, he teaches like the Zen principles. So I think sometimes, I look at the people I like the most. For example, the founder of Patagonia, I think like he's doing
yes.
clothes. I mean, great values, the company. And if you see at his work and the values of the company, like he's teaching Zen all the time to his community, I think. So that
Yeah,
is also interesting. Sometimes we focus too much on one thing and we can like leverage that thing on a completely different way.
we focus on one name for the thing, but some of the best teachers I've ever had in spiritual matters were actually not advertising themselves as spiritual teachers
That's
in a
very
way. Like the
true.
guy who
That's very
taught me how
true.
to weld and use machine tools. He is such a master at that his lessons were spiritual on how to do those things. Or when I first met Anjali, who has been helping me with meditation, she didn't say, I'm a guru and I can help rewire your
Sure.
brain. She said, oh, I'm a filmmaker and I happen to draw. And that was like
Yeah,
all
yeah,
these
I love it.
sideways in. And then in
Yeah,
my own life, I've had probably 100 people come through Creative Machines as employees and interns. And I always end up giving lots of life advice, but it's always in concrete terms. And, it's always like when people say,
I
what
think
do I
that's
do
the
with my
best
life?
way.
I
That
say,
is the
clean your
most.
workbench, organize your tools, make the best thing you can in the next hour, and you don't have to worry about your life because your life will take care of itself if you concentrate on those nuts and bolts.
Yeah, yeah, I think probably this is the best way to teach these principles, not by reading the principles out of a book. I mean,
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
but like living and experiencing them.
So this means you need to acquire another skill, another another thing and teach your spiritual principles through that other thing. So
Yeah,
I don't know what that is.
exactly.
Cooking
Ex-
or
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's a good direction. Yeah. I don't know what is either, but yeah, it will crystallize maybe one day.
yeah, yeah. I guess you have to ask yourself, and this happened to me just a few months ago. Um, have I been breathing out too much, trying to make without breathing in, or have I been filling myself too much and I need to put some of that together and put it out? Sometimes you breathe in too much, sometimes you breathe out too much. Or sometimes you're taking these quick, shallow breaths and you're not really pausing on the in
Mm.
and then pausing on the out, taking a little time to be empty, taking a little time to be full. It's all that timing.
Yeah, it's true. I like this balance between in and out. Yeah.
And I guess the other thing is sometimes people you always have to ask yourself, is this fun? Is this is this a good thing? And one of the things I often bring us back to as a group is, are we using our human superpowers? And some of those are to play, and some of those are to figure things out on the fly with with incomplete information to make good choices. But other human superpowers are to make lists and organize. And I'm always like, if we're not going to be working at our best if we're not using some of these basic things that we all know. And then sometimes the engineers will say, "Oh, but how could we possibly figure out what to do unless everything is written out beforehand, like with a complete list?" And I say, "Well, let's start with a list because to not would be not using our human superpower of communicating and planning. But then when we get into it and things change, the idea that we can't do it makes no sense because think of the things that humans do well, like jazz or even hunting, and the animal goes in an unpredictable way and we quickly make a new plan, or sports. All of that is done when you've made a plan and the plan kind of is just a general
Sure. Yeah.
direction.
Yeah, just
So
a direction for the beginning.
that's one thing to think about as you're doing your stuff is, am I using all of my superpowers? And then I guess the question a lot of people say is, if it feels bad in your heart, maybe it's not what you're supposed to be doing. And that's fine advice to give from a distance. But even the most enjoyable things in life, like there are days when it's just not going to be fun. And then the question is, how much of that do I put up with to do in the bigger picture what I love doing? Like even people I know who are like, firemen or rock stars or whatever, they have like dream jobs. They have bad days too.
Yeah, of
And I'm
course.
always a
Yeah.
little distrustful when people say, "Oh, it's all bliss and everything." I'm like, "Oh, come on, you're not telling me the truth." Or you're like one of those few 1 in 10 million angels.
No, no, it's true. It's true. Yeah, that is very interesting. Are we using all our superpowers? I think that's a good question to ask ourselves.
And
Yeah.
sometimes we talk ourselves out of some of them, like fictions that you have to plan everything. Like a lot of times people say, "You don't have a 5 year, a 10 year, and a 15-year plan?" And I'm like, well, I sort of have directions, but I'm like, so many of the people I admire, like Martin Luther King Jr., Abraham Lincoln, I don't know, just any example or whatever, they didn't like have such a rigid plan. They had really strong principles and they had a toolkit of ways to act and be in the world, but the world's
Yeah, that's
changing. You can't,
probably the
it's hard
best
to have a
way.
5 or 10. Mhm.
Yeah, you can't like force everything to that plan. And also like you are refusing to a lot of the wonder that you can find along the way if you have such a rigid plan. Yeah.
Yeah, that's always an interesting question is a lot of times you only get someplace if you focus a little bit, but at the same time you want to have your peripheral vision open to like take in all of these things. Like it was like a kid's field trip to Creative Machines a few years ago, and a kid says he's having a good time with his friends. He goes, "I wish I didn't have to leave. Can I come back tomorrow?" And in my straight ahead thing, I was already resenting the amount of time I had to spend on the field trip. I needed to get back to the office to get some work done. But something about that made me look to the side and I'd say, well, and I was starting to say, oh, you can't come back tomorrow because you need to get a field trip and a bus from the school and everything. But then I was like, well, why couldn't kids come every day here? So even when you're focused, it's good to keep a little bit of a view out to the side. And again, that's one of our human superpowers is, like most predators, we have our eyes forward, but we see a wider range of colors than most other animals. We can swivel them around, and our heads can swivel. For animals whose eyes are fixed straight ahead, we actually are remarkably good at peripheral vision. So
Yeah.
sometimes I look to anthropology and biology to to check my thoughts about how to interact with the world.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And Joseph, I was wondering now, at the moment, what are the main realization, the main thought, the main ideas that pop up in your life over the last days, over the last weeks? I'm curious to see what you're navigating at the moment.
Well, I've been thinking about it's interesting. Like if something sort of jars in my mind, I put it on a shelf. Um, right now, I'm trying to make a new type of kinetic sculpture, and I kept floundering and like spinning my wheels, not knowing what I wanted it to feel like as you're in the space. And there's two kinetic sculptures that I like. I like Calder in his mobiles because they're very expressive. You have something that's like a tail, something that's like pushing out into space. But Calder's mobiles don't really move, like because the center they'll spin lightly in a breeze, but the individual pieces aren't moving. They're almost like a beautiful form that's trapped in amber, and maybe the amber rotates on a turntable, and that's fine because Calder was only he was more interested in the balance than the actual movement. And then another kinetic
Mm-hmm.
sculptor who I had gotten to know some years ago, Tim Prentice, does these beautiful arrays of many small parts, and they're moving all the time. But the form that they take isn't, it's just like a rectangle. And so it has a lot of freedom and movement, but it doesn't have a personality that makes it worth moving. So these things are in the back of my mind, and I know I want to make a new type of kinetic sculpture, and I want to use light to have the movement activate a bigger space. And then I was chatting with our mutual friend Cecilia a few weeks ago, and the subject of freedom comes up. And we all think that we want maximum freedom. And I guess, freedom means many different things. And in some ways, we do want freedom. Even when we constrain ourselves, we want it to be a choice we have made. And so we're
Of
talking about
course.
freedom. And that helped crystallize my thought about the kinetic sculpture is I want something that has a form that is worth having, but then it's free to move. And so I'm trying to find a way to make sculptures that are as expressive and figurative as Calder's in space, but to have the freedom of movement that means expression in the fourth dimension of time that Tim Prentice has. So, like a
Mm-hmm.
philosophical conversation with a friend that doesn't really lead to any conclusions, but it made me think, freedom isn't everything. And as a person moves through their 20s and later in life, I kind of think you have to narrow down your freedom. Like, let's say you choose to have a child. You're giving up some of your freedom for 20 years if you are going to be responsible in that way. Or you start one business instead of another business. It's not like you can start a new business every day as your whims change. So, this idea
Of
of
course.
ultimate freedom, I think you have to start channeling, but you have to make those choices really good. You have to give up you trade freedom for depth and building something bigger than yourself or following something bigger than yourself. In the same way that yoga, the root of yoga is a bind, is you're giving up, you are putting yourself in a certain configuration in yoga to fully push out in other ways. And yoga is all the manipulations of being bound in one dimension and free in another. And so,
Mm,
like, I've been thinking about this, and that it's almost facetious to say you want ultimate freedom because ultimate freedom is like a plastic bag blowing in the wind, or it's like the infinity of outer space. It's terrifying, or it can be. But
yeah,
then, so
yeah.
too much freedom, and that's what I would characterize Tim Prentice his work as. It's moving around, but it doesn't have a form that you care whether it's moving around. Again, it's the plastic bag blowing in the wind. And he would probably differ, and that's okay. I love his work. And um, then you've got Calder's work, which is very expressive, but they're frozen. They don't really. It's scary. And so a philosophical
Mm.
discussion combined with working on the sculptural stuff, and I'm like, that's what I need to do. Does that mean I've solved with the linkages? And I'm nowhere near having solved it, but at least I know what experiments to do, and I know how to evaluate it as I do those experiments. So for me, it's a lot of putting stuff on the shelf, and then in a moment it crystallizes, or it doesn't completely crystallize. Like a certain idea crystallizes, and then it takes weeks of work to sort of bring that emotional crystal into the physical world.
Oh, wow, super interesting. Now I can see the process you explained before even better now
Mm.
with this example.
The other thing is,
I,
okay, another problem coming up is designing. I'm talking in a few days with a group that wants to do a play space in a brewery, and I think that's good because if people bring their parents, if people, I think drinking should be more of a social context or whatever. If people are going to do it and more comfortable, because if you're at a bar with just a TV, there's nothing to do but get hammered. But if your family's
yeah.
around and people, and it's a more social environment, and I think there's a big push in the States to mix genres, and I think that's good. So I have to think about play, which I often do a lot. And I've been spending a lot of time watching kids, and then the challenge is how do you make it something that the kids will play in productively, but it appeals to the parents as well, because that's an interesting challenge. So that's going to be my next challenge in the next few weeks.
I love it. I love it. I wish you all the best work into doing that.
Well, thank you.
Definitely gifted me a lot of ideas. I wrote them down over here, and I can see I have already one page
Oh,
full of
cool.
notes. And I bet it's
Let
gonna
me
be
tell you,
helpful also for the other people listening. Yeah.
as I listened to your podcasts to date, I felt a little like, oh, I don't belong on this podcast. They have it figured out. Like I have a crisis every few years. I feel I'm still figuring things out, whereas some of your other guests, I feel, have things more figured out. But I am still, and
No, but I think
it's
that's
taken me
why
a
you are
while
a great guest. I
to.
think because you're always questioning these things, but you are also, I think from what I've seen, you are also very proactive and you're always not only questioning things, but you are quickly trying to figure them out. So, and you're very creative into this process. So you bring many things together, you connect things. So now it's been super inspirational for me, like honestly.
One of the things that will probably happen to you, and I think happens to many people, is you will develop two ways of being in the world, and I think that's okay because there's a lot of, well, let's just take Christianity: give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. I think, and in certain meditative traditions, you part of you is always connected to this infinite egoless, almost blissful state. And the other part is acting fully in the world. And sometimes we have to alternate between the two for a time, and that's okay. But I think the state that we're all aspiring to is to simultaneously be in both. And people may say, oh, but then you're splitting your consciousness. Well, the human experience is half soul, half body, is half in the world, half out of the world. I don't know that that's bad if you do it right. And so what has helped me is, yes, I hold down a job, I keep 30 people employed, I'm a reasonably successful father, spouse, citizen of my city. I do all these things. And it's almost like when you can do all those things, the other half that is like a child in a responsible way can still be the child. You're going to have to develop almost two ways of being in the world, and don't let that scare you, because if you can really do what Jesus and Buddha and Rumi did, you can actually be both at the same time. And I think it's when people feel scared of being in both that they cling to just the child, and then they're the frustrated person that has not done anything in the world. Or what's more common is they give up the child and they think they have to fit a role and they only do that. And we really have to do
True.
both.
Yeah, we have to find the way to bring them together. Yeah, as one thing. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely. Joseph, really wanted to thank you because again, you gave me a lot of good advices and also for the other people listening. I think now I have a lot to think about and try to integrate into my life.
Well, let's keep the conversation going. And if any of your listeners want to reach out to me, just there's an info or contact us on Creative Machines, creativemachines.com, and secondsky.org, our not for profit.
I will do it. I will put the contacts in the description below, both in Spotify and YouTube. So yeah, anyone who has any question, they can write to you, or if they want to do it in the comments, whether personal or general, I think they are,
Sure.
of course, free to do it. So yeah,
Oh, and then my
amazing.
art is on josepho'connell.art. We have 3 websites. And that's part of like the
Okay.
multiple personalities you have in the world. And as you get older, you have these multiple personalities, but there is a soul that ties it all together. And on that
Yeah.
note,
I love the conversation. Let's have another one soon when I
yes.
bring in together all the ideas.